One thing I liked about your book is the big picture here. You're not just focusing on the seduction of consumers and their complicity in supporting these companies, because sooner or later, Amazon's going to be a big monopoly if it isn't stopped, and then the prices are going to go up for sure. You're talking about the democratic future of our country. You want to elaborate that a bit?
Yeah, because democracy, as I've said, requires people to be independent thinkers, and it requires us to make good decisions. The hero of my book is really Louis Brandeis, who is somebody who's fallen out of favor over time. He was, of course, a Supreme Court justice, and he was also the guy who did the most to formulate our ideas about privacy, as well as being perhaps the greatest enemy of monopoly in this country. And for me, he got it exactly right, which is that part of the reason that he saw monopolies as so dangerous was that he saw the ways in which people become dependent on monopolies. He feared that workers wouldn't feel like they could be independent enough to vote their mind or formulate their own opinions if they became dependent on their employer or became dependent on a monopoly. And he also formulated the idea of privacy in a way that seems to me that best gets at the concept, which is that in order to think independent thoughts, we can't be afraid that somebody is watching over our shoulder. That as soon as we start to sense that somebody is watching us while we think, we begin to formulate our thoughts to appease our audience. And so we become, if we're being watched, we become more cautious, we become less subversive. And both of these things are tremendous, tremendous dangers for monopoly. And what Brandeis did, which I think needs to come back into vogue, was that he didn't sit around obsessing over whether companies were supplying the lowest prices. He was obsessing about how these companies would affect democracies writ large. He was worried about us as citizens and not just as consumers.
That's right. And Louis Brandeis co-authored a law review article over 100 years ago showing that privacy is rooted in our Constitution, obviously in the Fourth Amendment, search and seizure, etc. And so he was very influential in that sense. Now, in your book, you propose a data protection authority to get the privacy issue under some sort of public protection. You want to explain that?
So I am interested in trying to find a way to force the system back into the sorts of paradigms that you described before. So data is like the environment. It's not a good that these companies own. It's a good that they exploit. And so just as we let companies exploit the environment to a certain extent, we could certainly let companies exploit data to a certain extent, but they shouldn't be permitted to act as if they actually own the data. The data, at the end of the day, is ours. And so we need a regulatory system that shifts the balance back to this fundamental recognition of who actually owns the data. And so if they're going to be permitted to use data, they're going to have to accept responsibility for that. And that means that the government should be able to impose a system upon these companies that makes them act in the public interest as they exploit our data. It's just astonishing how little our system does to protect privacy and protect data. There's no comprehensive law protecting data in this country.
Well, in that vein, do you favor that the consumers who give all that free information, personal information to Facebook, should have a proprietary right of ownership and be able to charge Facebook for use of that information, which is the basis of Facebook's profits, of course?
Yeah, I think that that's an interesting idea. I think we need a cleaner solution than that. I think as consumers, we need to be able to bargain with these guys from a position of much greater leverage, that the terms of service use that you alluded to earlier are so abusive, and we click them without reading them and without feeling like we have any sort of choice in the matter. And if you want to opt out of the system in any sort of way, it requires mastering a complicated bureaucratic system that's set up to prevent our ability from escaping their desire to peer more deeply into our lives. And
as I've said, underneath all is the fine print contract, which is what you're referring to.
Exactly. And we need to recognize what these companies are doing. They're playing a bureaucratic trick on us. In some ways, these are innovative companies, but they also are incredibly bureaucratic. They subject us to forms and rules, and they try to obscure our ability to navigate our ways out of this system. And so the law should be much more forceful in demanding that these companies be straighter with us and demand that these companies give us greater agency over our privacy.
In your book you say, quote, citizens, not the corporations that stealthily track them, should own their own data. The law should demand that these companies treat this data with the greatest care because it doesn't belong to them. And elsewhere in your book, you say consumers should have the choice of opting out, not simply be assumed that they've opted in some fine print contract of many pages.
Yes. These are oppressive documents. These terms of service agreements give them incredible amounts of latitude and immunity. And as consumers, we feel like we have no recourse. And what kind of system is that, where consumers feel like they have no recourse over things that are so intimate and that actually, in the end, really do belong to them?
You go back to a traditional proposal where you say on page 203, very clearly written book, by the way, listeners, it may seem confusing, but it's very, very clearly written. And you say, the health of our democracy demands we consider treating Facebook, Google, and Amazon with the same firm hand that led government to wage war on AT&T, IBM, and Microsoft, namely monopolies at that time. Even, you say, dismembering them into smaller companies if circumstances in the law demand a forceful response, end quote. Well, supposedly they are broken up, but they all behave the same way, a sort of parallel oligopoly. Would that change anything?
Look, as liberals and reformers, we're trapped into oftentimes a binary way of thinking about corporate size, where we have these two traditions. We have the Brandeis tradition, which is you try to create smallness. You're afraid of big concentrations of power. And then there's the kind of Teddy Roosevelt approach, which leads us to greater and greater regulation, where there's some sort of acceptance of size as an inevitability. And I don't think it's an either-or sort of choice. We need to have a system where we use the power of our antitrust laws, the original antitrust laws as they were written, not as they've been reinterpreted over time, to try to create smaller companies and to try to prevent them from extending their arms into the next areas of technology, but that we also have regulatory solutions that we apply in an extremely sort of aggressive way. Because the truth is, even if we were to break these companies up, they would still have very strong incentives to keep surveilling us and to exploit our privacy and to abuse their power. So we need to use all the tools in our chest.
Well, I'd like you to draw the listeners' attention to the last two chapters, which are short, one called The Organic Mind and the other called The Paper Rebellion. The basic framework, listeners, I would suggest is that as long as Facebook, Google, and the other monopolists that we're discussing in this book spend infinitely more time figuring out ways to control you, to try to persuade you that because some things are discounted or some things are free, that you should surrender your being to their marketing framework. As long as they spend far more time than we as people spend trying to figure out how to escape their control, how to live a higher quality life, they're going to make Aldous Huxley's Brave New World look like an understatement. It's way beyond 1984 now. Orwell, it's Brave New World. And so I was intrigued in the chapter, The Organic Mind. You start out by saying, quote, the optimistic prospects for escaping the pull of Facebook, Google, and Amazon come in the form of yogurt, granola, and MASH, end quote. Can you explain that?
So we look at food, and I draw an extended analogy to food. So we had the emergence of processed foods, TV dinners, and the like, and the culture embraced them because it seemed like they were godsends, that we didn't have to go shopping every day and we didn't need to clean up pots and pans. and they were incredibly cheap. And then we woke up 50 years later, maybe people knew this earlier, but that these foods were engineered to make us fat, that they disrupted a whole economy, leading to greater and greater concentration. And my fear is that the same thing is happening now with the things that we ingest through our minds, and that content is becoming more processed. And I use the word content. It's a horrible word. It reflects everything that's wrong with the way that we think about journalism and information and culture now. But it's a pretty dark comparison, except for one thing, which is that when it comes to food, there's been a backlash, and that people started to care a lot more about the things that they ingest. And so they've started to sacrifice efficiency in order to buy foods that are organic or that they believe haven't been polluted with pesticides or whatever, and that they've started to shop at farmers markets because they want to be more intimately connected to the production of food. And my hope is that we can extend that parallel into knowledge and culture, and that we can make the same sorts of virtuous choices that at least some people make when it comes to food, that we should care deeply about how information is produced. And you know what? We're going to have to pay for it. This expectation that we can get quality information for free has turned out to be a really dangerous assumption. It's driven the quality of information down to levels where we get Donald Trump as president. And so, I think that there is some hope ultimately that we can have some sort of cultural counter-revolution that can push back against the tides.
What do you think the schools should do other than try to put a computer in front of every 9-year-old's pupil?
First of all, Silicon Valley has extended its reach into these schools, and they've tried
huge.
Yeah, and that's a scandal, and that we need to push back against that. But the other thing that I think is important is that we need to treat computer science in a different sort of way. That we live in a world where computer science has this dominion over everything right now, because everything can be reduced to algorithms and to code. And unfortunately, the people who have this power are people who are trained to think only in terms of efficiency, only in terms of systems, because that's the ethos of computer science. And so I think we actually need to encourage a more humanistic approach to computer science, where we don't just teach kids how to code and to program, but we need to teach them how to think ethically, and we need to teach them how to think about moral and political problems, so that we're not just leaving the system in the hands of people who are trying to design things in a way that is maximally efficient.